welcome to our activity for today, our program on e-commerce. We, uh, we are very glad that you were able to join us for this very important activity here at UP Open University. So the title of our activity, the seminar this morning is E-commerce for Government Transactions, Policies, Issues, and Opportunities. At this point, we'd like to start off by acknowledging, welcoming our guests and the participants who came from different government and private agencies. I'd just like to give a rundown of the different agencies represented here this morning before we proceed to the program proper. As your agency is called, you may want to stand up or raise your hand to be acknowledged. But first of all, I'd like to mention that this activity we're having now is organized by the UP Open University and the Philippine Institute of Certified Public Accountants, PICPA, Erie UPLB chapter. So to start off, we'll mention the government agencies who are with us right now. From the UP system, we have representatives from UP Diliman. Yes, welcome. Accounting Office and Cash Office of UP Diliman. From UP PGH, over there, the Accounting Office of UP PGH. From UP Los Baños, ayan, malapit lang po, no? So we have from the Accounting Office of UP Los Baños. Okay. From the Internal Control Office of UPLB. The Supplies and Property Management Office, UPLB. Yun po. The Cash Office. And the Budget Office of UPLB. And the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Administration of UP Los Baños. So I think we have quite a number from UP Los Baños. Also from the UP Information Technology and Training Development Center. Na traffic pa, okay? Yung mga EUP team leaders, yeah, so they're still on their way here. And from the UP system, also they're still on their way here. We will acknowledge them as they come later on, as they arrive. Okay, from UPOU, we have the administrative staff of the accounting office, UPOU. They're still working. Represented by Ma'am Shoni Haen here. Cash office, I think they're still in the secretariat, the registration tables. The SPMO, the general services. Okay, they're Office of Legal Services of OU. Okay. Nagtatrabaho po sa labas. Faculty members of UPOU. Okay. And the reps of UPOU. And the officials of UPOU, I just like to make special mention of our Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, Dr. Melinda Lumanta. The Vice Chancellor for Finance and Administration, Dr. Jean Saludades. And Dr. Bagarinaw, the Registrar of UP Open University. I think Prof. Pat Arinto, of the Dean of the Faculty of Education of OU. And the members of the Chancellor Advisory Committee of UP Open University. The UPOU Fiscal Policies and Operations Committee, the one who really took charge of this affair together with the PICPA, Erie. Are they here? They're still working outside. Okay. Now, so aside from the different UP units being represented here, we also have other government agencies who came over. So these are the following: DOST 4A, Department of Science and Technology 4A. All right. Representatives from the Laguna State Polytechnic University. There. Okay. DOSTP card. ERDB. Okay. the Laguna Water District, Phil Rice. The Philippine High School for the Arts. We have one representative. And the LLDA, Laguna Lake Development Authority. Baka wala pa. Okay. So aside from the government agencies who are with us today, we also have private agencies who accepted our invitation to join the affair this day. We have Health Serve Los Baños Medical Center, Sikap Bidani Development Foundation, UPLB Foundation Incorporated, FI, baka na traffic din. And of course, from PICPA Erie UPLB, I would like to acknowledge the presence of the president of PICPA Erie UPLB chapter, the president and the members, led by the president, Ms. Evelyn Inocencio. Also, we have with us today the president of GACPA, Government Association of Certified Public Accountants, Ms. Margie Official. Welcome. And also from Cruz Caimo Partners and Associates, Ms. Tina, who is also a faculty of UPOU. All right, so did we miss out on anybody? Meron po bang hindi natawag pero nag-register? So everyone was called. So as the other participants would be coming in, we will be acknowledging them later. So I'm sure you're all very eager to start the program for today. And what better way to start it and to set the tone for the activity today, we will hear the message coming from our Chancellor, Dr. Grace Alfonso. She cannot be with us today, but her message will be read to us by Vice Chancellor Jean Saludades, Vice Chancellor for Finance and Admin, UP Open University.
Thank you, Angie. Vice Chancellor Lumanta and members of the Chancellor Advisory Committee, PICPA President, Ms. Evelyn Inocencio, GACPA National President, Mrs. Margie Official, our distinguished resource persons and participants and guests, the UP community, the UPOU family, and those who are with us watching the web stream. Good morning. Chancellor Alfonso is extending her apologies for not being able to grace this activity as she is attending an event, her attendance to which she cannot delegate, the wedding of her eldest son. But she has prepared her message that I shall be reading to you now. As government agencies, we are mandated to serve our publics to the best of our abilities and within the bounds of accountability and transparency. Not only do we need to perform our mandates, we also have to be efficient in the management of our affairs and the delivery of our services. Since the dawn of civilization, organizations, including government institutions, have looked to technology to realize their visions and enhance their operations. In the past, we have seen how computers have helped us improve our documentation, computation, and database tasks. The advent of internet has allowed us to gather and disseminate more information to our stakeholders more effectively. Today, the internet is not just a means to information sourcing, but also for facilitating financial transactions. In the commercial sector, e-commerce has enabled both buyers and sellers to simplify and fast-track their transactions. Through this system, sellers are able to expand their reach and buyers can make purchases anywhere and anytime. It also enabled businesses not to tie their investments to large physical assets. As one of the major pillars of our society, the government is not immune to these technological changes. The E-Commerce Act, or RA 7892, allows for the formation of contracts and transaction of business in electronic forms. It aims to provide the government sector access to the benefits of e-commerce transactions such as speed, low cost, and wide geographical reach, all in the service of the nation. As a cyber campus of UP, the UP Open University fully supports this end. The UPOU was established in 1995 as the fifth constituent university of the University of the Philippines system. We provide education opportunities to individuals aspiring for higher education and improved qualifications, but who are unable to take advantage of traditional modes of education. When UPOU was established 17 years ago, the university taught primarily through standalone modules in print. With the growth of the internet at the turn of the century, the university shifted its gears and adopted online teaching and learning. Harnessing the advantages of these technologies, the UPOU decided to look at e-learning as a means to enrich the learning experience of our students. In addition, e-learning also has enabled us to expand our reach abroad. At present, our offshore students come from over 40 countries and comprise 20% of our total student enrollment. Our experience has shown that online technologies can help institutions engage with their publics in a more responsive way. Not only have we tapped online technologies for teaching and learning, we have also used it for student registration. Today, UPOU is the only UP campus where enrollment fees can be paid by credit card. Since UPOU's infrastructure is highly dependent on online products and technologies, we have recently created a system for electronic purchasing of goods and services that can only be paid online. The university truly supports e-governance as a tool for responsible and efficient public service. As we in the government sector work towards maximizing the affordances of e-commerce for public service, we must also ensure that we do this in accordance with the provisions of the law. It is also for this reason that the UPOU has joined hands with the Philippine Institute of Certified Public Accountants, UPLB Erie chapter, in running this seminar on e-commerce for government transactions. We hope that with this seminar, we can be familiarized with commonly used instruments and payment schemes for e-commerce and the required compliance to the usual government auditing and accounting rules and regulations. Once again, let me welcome you to the seminar and may you have fruitful and engaging discussions ahead of you. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor Saludades, for bringing us the message of Chancellor Alfonso. With that, I think we are put in the proper perspective as to what we are here for this morning, this day. We often hear about e-commerce. We're quite familiar with it, but I think it would help if we get some meaty discussions perhaps, or talks about the technical things about e-commerce, the rules governing it. And that's what we will be tackling the whole day today. I think we have we have participants who are coming in right now. They are the representatives of the EUP system. So we welcome them from Diliman, I think. From the EUP team leaders. Okay, so we now embark on the start of the program, and I'd like to call on the Chief Legal Counsel of UP Open University, Attorney Rowena S. Dicini, to introduce our speaker, the first speaker for this morning.
The speaker for this morning, Attorney J.J. Dicini, was admitted to the bar at 1994, and he's currently a professor in the UP College of Law. As the first lawyer member of the Philippine Internet Commerce Society, he was actively involved in the lobbying efforts for the passage of the E-Commerce Act. He personally drafted the E-Commerce Act's implementing rules and regulations under the supervision and control of an interagency task force committee co-chaired by the Department of Trade and Industry, Department of Budget and Management, and of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. After graduating from the UP College of Law, he has been continuously practicing law since 1994. In 2004, he obtained a degree in Masters of Law from Harvard Law School. So to start the program, I think he will be talking about highlights on the e-commerce law. Please let's welcome Professor J.J. Decini.
Thank you very much. So I feel like I'm 13 years late for this talk. The E-commerce Act was my memory is so bad. I think it's either 2000, signed into law in 2000 by President Estrada, and in the IRR was signed by him as well. And back then, in the law itself, there were provisions already for government adoption of electronic commerce, and also for electronic commerce as well in the private sector. Back then in 2000, there was virtually nothing in terms of e-commerce, and it took I think a full decade after that to see e-commerce in the private sector come to fruition. So if I may just ask those who attended, how many of you have you ever bought a coupon recently from an online site in the last 6 months? Cash Pinoy or Metro Deal, di ba? How many of you have bought a ticket on Cebu Pacific? You know, there you go. Did you know that Cebu Pacific is the #1 e-commerce site in the Philippines? #1 e-commerce site in terms of transactions. The airline sites, we're seeing the coupon sites are coming to the fore. There's already online shopping. I don't know if you've tried out Zalora or Lazada. Unfortunately, quite recently, one of the online marketplaces, Multiply, shut down. So there's already movement in the market, nag-shift na sila. But what's important, I think, is that the value of the transactions are starting to go up. People are starting to transact online, and it's not. And I guess it's opportune. It's an opportune time, perfect time for government to go into e-commerce. It's a full decade after the law was enacted, which is fine. Kasi ang challenges talaga ng law when the law was enacted in 2000, the infrastructure wasn't really in place. Internet penetration wasn't that deep. Wala tayong ability to handle a lot of the issues, including payments. In fact, transacting with government or for government to adopt e-commerce, although it was mandated in the law, in terms of infrastructure, there was nothing. There were some work had to be done. I remember one of the biggest problems for government transactions in e-commerce was if you're a user and you transact with government, you will more often than not use your credit card. Now, if a government agency signs a contract with a credit card payment gateway provider, what will happen is if your fees are, say, 200 pesos, the gateway facility will not give you 200 pesos. They'll give you 200 pesos less 5%. And the big issue was, could the government pay that 5% when the government agency is not allowed to deduct any amount than what it was, what it is permitted to collect. On the other hand, on its website, it could not collect more since its mandate is to collect as the specific amount. So there were a lot of legal issues or hurdles. There were even issues of, how will the money end up with the government agency since you're dealing with private banks, when the preference of government agencies is to deal with GFIs, the government financial institutions, so either PNB or Land Bank. As far as I know, and I guess this is the good news, is that there's really very little issues now about government agencies going into e-commerce or transacting with the general public online. I think a lot of the issues have already been resolved legally. It's a matter of now of how you want to deploy. The issues perhaps relate more to designing your system, technical issues, procurement issues, but less on the legal issues. And I hope if there's any point that I make today that you will take away from this is that there's very little hindrance legally to stop you from engaging in e-commerce. But it was pointed out to me just right now that perhaps one of the reasons why government agencies have not been very active in going into e-commerce is perhaps there's been little guidance through the Commission on Audit, no, through COA. Perhaps if COA would come up with clearer guidelines on how they will audit e-commerce projects, then perhaps agencies would be more encouraged to engage in this, or at least have the courage to enter into these types of projects, knowing that the guidelines insofar as the COA audit, post-audit are clear. So that's one thing I hope to work on. I'm from the UP College of Law, and we were fortunate enough to 2 out of the 3 COA commissioners are from UP Law, and both of them actually were in the faculty, including the chair. So I think it would be just a matter of time. My idea now is to go back to my dean, and perhaps to the UP Law Center we can coordinate with with COA to come up with these guidelines, no, to encourage online entry of government into the online space. So that's my basic message. Now we go, but I still have an hour and a half to kill. So I have to bore you with the details of the E-commerce Act. Actually, just in the past year, we did a project, my firm, together with my wife here. We did a project for a government agency where we looked at a very complex interagency system involving trade transactions, import-export. And we looked at the challenges from the standpoint of e-commerce. So there are some challenges, but on the whole, our conclusion was that the elements legally, in terms of the framework for setting up even complex interagency transactions, are there, and it is not impossible for government to do this. Okay, so I'll start with the E-commerce Act, which is, I guess, where everything starts. So the E-commerce Act was intended to secure a legal environment for electronic commerce. So pre-1999, or actually, I think it was in 1998, the Supreme Court handed down this decision in the IBM case. And in that case, what happened was there was an employee. He wasn't a very good employee, so he comes in late. He was a bad employee. And apparently in 1989 or early 90s, IBM already had an internal email system. So what they would do is they would send him notices of tardiness by email. And then, in fact, when they asked him to explain it, he explained by email. And then they even notified him of his termination by email. Okay, so talagang all email. This is pre-internet. They had their own system. And what happened was, as to be expected, he filed an illegal termination case against IBM. So IBM now has to present all these emails in the NLRC. Now, in the NLRC, it's very informal. There's no trial. More often than not, you file a position paper and you just attach the documents. So what IBM's lawyer did was they printed out the emails and they attached it. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said that the emails that were presented by IBM were inadmissible. They were not admissible as evidence. And it left this impression that electronic messages, email, is inherently offhand, per se, not admissible in evidence. That is actually wrong. The reason why it was excluded by the court, or the court did not admit the email evidence, was because it was not certified. It had not been properly authenticated in accordance with the rules. So the court wasn't saying that electronic messages are inadmissible. What they were saying was that if you follow the rules, then it can become admissible. So come 1999, 2000, well, actually 1999 was that whole year. I don't know if you recall. I'm sure all of you remember. Everybody went crazy for Y2K. I don't know if you remember. Parang the world was going to end in the year 2000 if we don't remediate in 1999. And 2000 happened and nothing happened. Right? Parang the big non-event. Hindi mo alam kung successful. Some people were saying it was one of the biggest scams of the IT industry to scare us all into spending so much money into compliance, but nothing happened. And so they said 1999 was for Y2K, but the year 2000 was for e-commerce. And the Philippine government, understanding that that year was going to be a banner year supposedly for e-commerce, felt that with the Supreme Court decision in place, casting doubt whether or not electronic transactions are valid, felt the need to enact the E-commerce Act. So as to ensure explicitly the Philippine Congress will declare explicitly that all electronic contracts are valid. And that is the basic premise of the E-Commerce Act. It declares, makes it very, very clear that electronic contracts are valid. Now, electronic contracts under our law were already valid anyway under the Civil Code. Because the Civil Code, we follow what's known as the spiritual system. Contracts are valid in whatever form they may be found. In other words, a verbal contract is as good as a written contract. As a general rule, the law does not require that contracts be in writing. As a general rule, there are some exceptions, but as a rule, a verbal contract is valid. And if a verbal contract is valid, certainly an electronic contract would be valid as well. But there's nothing like something clear from government, right? Like the E-Commerce Act, which specifically says this is valid. Okay. So the E-Commerce Act, its purpose again was to, as I repeat, is to secure a legal environment to promote electronic commerce. It's not the final word on e-commerce, and there are a lot of other issues involving electronic commerce, foremost of which is jurisdiction, whether or not the Philippine courts have jurisdiction over transactions or events that happen outside. And this is a continuing problem that that Congress will have to deal with, or even the courts will have to deal with. And I guess the case law will have to spell that out. Other issues such as intellectual property, you might have concerns about copyright issues. That is not resolved by the E-Commerce Act. Recently, the Philippine government enacted the Data Privacy Act, which is an important act which also affects government in particular and how government uses personal information. So actually, that's one of the things that you need to watch out for when you deploy your systems. You need to make sure that your systems are compliant with the Data Privacy Act. So there are a lot of issues that you're going to have to deal with when it comes to deploying your e-commerce system. So e-commerce act, the main feature of the act, the way that it legalizes electronic contracting is by recognizing the validity of electronic documents, and that an electronic document is the same as a writing. So something that's written on paper or something that is considered in writing is deemed to be equivalent to an electronic document legally. There is no discrimination between an electronic document and a paper writing. The other thing that the law did was to say that electronic signatures are the same as handwritten signatures. But I will qualify this. There is actually only a limited recognition of electronic signatures. Not all electronic signatures are recognized by the law. I need to look at my slides here. Well, okay. Kasi I'll explain it now. Kasi baka na further down the law. What is an electronic signature? So an electronic signature, the way the law works, is any mark that you adopt, right? It's the same as a handwritten signature. A mark that you adopt in electronic form that you use to identify yourself and to indicate your consent to a particular transaction or to a particular document, to authenticate a particular document. So in my case, if you ever sent an email to me, I end all my emails with a dash and a small, in lowercase letters, JJ. That's how I end my emails. That is my electronic signature, right? In your case, you might adopt a different, some people, they put their name, that's their electronic signature. The question that the law is supposed to answer is that considered equivalent to your handwritten signature? Now, under the UNCITRAL model law upon which we based our law, the answer should be yes. My -JJ is supposed to be equivalent to my handwritten signature. Unfortunately, when Congress got its hands on the UNCITRAL model law, there were so many security features that Congress wanted to insert. Actually, tyranny of the BICAM again. No? All of these security features appeared in the Bicameral Conference Committee in the E-Commerce Act. And as a result, they only allowed, I'm not sure if my slideshow will show you that particular provision, but it's I call it the Frankenstein provision because it's a provision that was taken from different laws all over the world to make it almost impossible to understand. The bottom line is that very few signatures, in fact, only digital signatures, which is a specific type of signature technology, only digital signatures, in my view, are valid under Philippine law. But we shouldn't worry about that. I'm saying that the E-Commerce Act does not recognize too many electronic signatures, we shouldn't be too worried because, as I mentioned earlier, as a general rule, contracts and transactions under Philippine law need not be authenticated. In other words, for a contract to be valid or a transaction to be valid, a signature does not have to appear anywhere. So the fact that the law doesn't recognize electronic signatures so much isn't a major problem, unless it's a specific type of transaction or type of contract that you're dealing with. Okay, so scope of the law. Now, the E-commerce Act is supposed to cover commercial transactions, kaya nga, electronic commerce. But the Philippine government or the Congress extended its scope to include non-commercial transactions as well. And in fact, in Section 27, the Philippine or Congress mandates that within 3 years from the enactment of the law, the entire Philippine government is supposed to be enabled to transact electronically with the general public. Now, as all of us know, that deadline came and it went. But Congress knew that that deadline was not a feasible deadline. They knew that 3 years would not be enough for the entire Philippine government to transact. In fact, in 2003, I'm not aware of any government in the world that could transact almost entirely electronically with their citizens. I think at that time, and perhaps even today, the government that's the most advanced in terms of transacting with citizens online is I was going to say North Korea, not North Korea. They don't transact electronically. It's South Korea. Highest broadband penetration in the world. They have very good infrastructure in South Korea. In fact, our games, may mga online games natin, a lot of them come from Korea. But also in terms of government infrastructure, they do a lot of transacting online. You can deal with your local government online. You can, if you want to move, you can record yourself. You can register yourself with the local government entirely online. The E-commerce Act also has a provision on the retention of electronic documents. In other words, if you're required by law to have documents in paper form to keep them for a certain period of time, you may keep them in electronic formats as well. Finally, there is a provision in the law which is now our current and existing cybercrime law. As you know, the Cybercrime Prevention Act, which was enacted late last year, was subjected to a temporary restraining order by the Supreme Court. And I understand through a media report that the court will render a decision this week, will hand down the decision of the Cybercrime Prevention Act. We're expecting that they will strike down some provisions and keep the rest of the statute. But while the TRO is in place, the cybercrime law that we have is the cybercrime law that was enacted in the E-commerce Act, and that is the provision on hacking and online piracy. So just some underlying principles for the E-commerce Act. The first is functional equivalence. So the way to understand whether or not something is the equivalent of a paper document is, if something is in electronic form that serves the same function, then it is considered equivalent to a paper document. So let's think about it from the standpoint of a signature. That's the easiest way. So what would be considered an electronic signature? The way functional equivalence works is that if there's anything in electronic form that performs the same function as a handwritten signature, then it will be considered an electronic signature. So the functions of a signature are: one, to identify you; second, to indicate your consent to a transaction or authentication of a document. If there's something that you utilize electronically that performs the same function, then it will be considered the equivalent of a handwritten signature. The other principle that pervades to the E-commerce Act is technology neutrality. The earlier law that was supposed to be enacted by Congress, which they did not, involved EDI, electronic data interchange, which is a specific type of technology and operates within that context only. If Congress had enacted that law, then today it would be largely inapplicable because EDI as a technology is utilized only by as back-end operations for large companies, but has very little impact on electronic commerce. One example I can think of is the back-end operations for SM Supermarket runs on an EDI. These are old systems, but they work very well in the retail sector. And a lot of the large retailers in the US utilize that technology. But a lot of the front-end online systems have junked that technology. So the E-Commerce Act, to avoid that problem where you have a law that when the technology changes, it's not applicable anymore, the E-Commerce Act is technology neutral. So now, actually, moving forward, if you're going to deploy your own e-commerce system, more likely than not, you will have to consider deploying through mobile phones. So it's not enough that you set up a website. What's more likely is you will end up having to develop an application to run on an Android phone or an iPhone. And that's the what they call the post PC world. So something that you have a system, you have a website that you set up. At the same time, you want that website to be viewable on a pad, right? On an Android pad or an iPad. You want it to be viewable also on smartphones. And instead of exclusively serving your customers through the web, you will end up serving your customers through apps. So those of you who have smartphones and you access Facebook through the Facebook app, it's exactly the same thing. You will end up developing application systems specifically for your site. So despite these advancements, the E-Commerce Act continues to apply because the E-Commerce Act, as I mentioned earlier, is technology neutral. The E-Commerce Act is also media neutral. In other words, when in the case of documents, for example, it is the contents that is the electronic document. So it is the information in the electronic document that is considered the electronic document. So whether it becomes a from a Microsoft Word file to an email, despite the media in which it is contained, since the contents are the electronic document, then it is preserved. Non-discrimination, this is important. Actually, I tell this to judges when I lecture, that they should not discriminate an electronic document from a paper document simply on the basis that it's in electronic form. If you want to cast doubt, if somebody wants to cast doubt on the authenticity of an electronic document, then evidence should be presented, even at least testimonial evidence, to cast doubt on electronic documents. There is a tendency on the part of judges to say when something is in writing or in a paper document, they give it a lot of credibility. My sense is that, or what I try to inform our judges is that they should give the same doubt, the same level of credence to electronic documents. The benefit of the doubt should tilt in favor of validity instead of invalidity. Okay. So here we go. Ito yung electronic signatures provision that I mentioned earlier. Napakalinaw pala nung this one. So as you can see, it's it's such a very long provision. I call this nga the Frankenstein provision because this was taken from different laws that are not necessarily consistent with each other. And this isn't a crowd of lawyers. If it were a crowd of lawyers, I would challenge them to read it and try to understand what it means because it's incomprehensible. So sabi daw dito, okay, let's try to go through it. No? So a method, so it's a signature, no? A signature daw, a valid signature is a prescribed procedure. So doon pa lang, confusing na eh. A signature is a procedure. And then, under that procedure, there is a method to identify a party and to indicate that party's access to the electronic document. The method is reliable and appropriate. And then, it is necessary for the party sought to be bound to have executed or provided the electronic signature. And here's the strange part, which is number 4. The other party is authorized and enabled to verify the electronic signature. So the assumption here is that there is another party. But in a signature, there's only one party. It's just the signer. So who's the other party? Right? So, yun yung confusing. I think what they meant by other party is an interested party, meaning somebody who's interested in the signature itself. What you can see is what Congress tried to do here is to try to put in as much security features as possible into signatures. In other words, they themselves, it seemed ang sense that I get from Congress was they doubted whether or not electronic signatures will be something that people will rely on because it's so easy to fake an email or to create an electronic document. So they say, look, if it's going to be the same as a handwritten signature, then it should have all of these security features in. The effect, the cumulative effect of all of these provisions is that there doesn't seem to be any technology that complies with all of that. That's the problem. Except, as I mentioned, digital signatures. And digital signatures is a peculiar type of technology which utilizes encryption technologies as well as trusted third parties in order to ensure that the document has not been changed and that the identity of the signer is sure. Did I confuse you with that? An example of where digital signatures is supposed to be used is in the PCOS machine. So sabi nila, in the PCOS, the Board of Election Inspectors are supposed to be given this USB, right? And then when they insert it and they enter the PIN, then it will sign the election returns. Actually, even that is not a valid electronic signature under the E-Commerce Act. Because the main flaw, and I don't know if this is a flaw, I mean, this is something that perhaps candidates can bring up with the COMELEC. The thing about the PCOS system is that when the USB card, which contains the signature, so-called signature, of the chair, for example, of the Board of Election Inspectors, in order for it to be a valid electronic signature, the COMELEC must know through the Department of Education that that USB card is given to a particular person, and they ensure that that person is actually the recipient. In other words, if I were the chair of the Board of Election Inspectors, the COMELEC must know through the DepEd that that device, that USB stick, went and was received by JJ Dicini. But the fact of the matter is, the way they deploy the PCOS system is that when they deploy these USB cards, they merely address it to whoever is the chair in that particular precinct. So they don't know who that person is. All they know is that person is the person to whom it was delivered. And that person, and the packet contains the PIN. So is it susceptible of challenge? Possible. Actually, I don't know if any of you are public school teachers and therefore you're involved in this. Sabi nila, when at the end of the day, when all of the machines, when the machine counts all the ballots, no, which we don't know how it counts it, right? We don't know how this PCOS machine counts. It is literally the black box, and it's colored black. I think it's just incidental, but it's literally the black box. When it prints out the election returns, it's not signed. Oh, sorry. They require the Board of Election Inspectors to sign. But when you read what they sign, they're not attesting to the correctness of the count. All they're attesting is that at the end of the day, when they press print, this is the result that the machine printed out. Did you know that? It is literally a black box. If you look at a PCOS machine, eto side trip na lang tayo kasi election period naman, kaya masaya to. If you look at a PCOS machine, there is a screen, right? But it's dead. It's disabled. Well, it's not. I don't know. We didn't spend the money for it to work properly. And then there are two buttons: a green button and a red button, right? Now, what do they tell you to do? They tell you to feed your ballot and press the green button. Yun yung instruction, di ba? Then you sit down, you feed it to the ballot, press the green button, and then you leave. Do you have any idea how the machine looked at your votes? No. How was PCOS supposed to work? The way it's supposed to work is, so you fill out your ballot, right? And then you feed it to the machine. The screen is supposed to tell you how you voted. President, ito yung pinili mo. It's supposed to inform you. Now, when you're satisfied with the result, you press the green button. When you're not satisfied with the result, you press the red button, ibabalik sa'yo yung ballot mo. Feed mo ulit. Kasi pag hindi siya imagine, kasi magkakadikit na yung dots, di ba? Pag pumasok ng ganon yon, pag binasa ng baliktad, mali na yung count. Di ba? Mali yung count. Pag if it detects a double count, sakali nag-exceed ka, I think if you exceed the number of senators, you go 13, it disables all your votes for senator are discounted. So if it's fed the wrong way or the machine reads it the wrong way, you'll never know because they disabled it. In fact, after you press the green, the way it's supposed to work, magbibigay pa ng written receipt sa'yo yon para sigurado ka, ito yung boto ko. Dinisable rin ng COMELEC yon for obvious reasons, right? Vote buying. Kasi, kunin mo yung resibo, pakita mo sa labas, binoto ko yung kandidato mo, akin na yung ano. But actually, when you think about it, they could have kept it anyway for the benefit of the voter. yung receipt, pwede mo i-drop sa ballot box. They could have done that, di ba? For some reason, they didn't. That's what I'm saying that when we vote on May 13, I'm not saying that the system is dishonest. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we don't know. We submit ourselves to the black box. Yeah, so there's that. And not even the Board of Election Inspectors, they don't even know. Which why, personally, for me, the better solution was Gus Lagman's solution, but apparently, he wasn't confirmed by the Senate. Ang solution niya kasi, which actually makes sense, he said that the problem in Philippine elections isn't the counting, because the teachers are very honest, right? Plus, ang daming tao nagbabasa. Paglabas ng balota ng ganun, ayun na yung mga watchers sa likod. Hindi ka makakadaya sa sitwasyon na mabagal lang yung count. It takes them 12 hours ata, or 10 to 12 hours to count, but it's an honest count. The problem in Philippine elections is the transmission of the results. So, ang sa kanya, let's manual na yung count, i-automate natin yung transmission. Pero what happened in the system that we purchased, both are now automated. The count and the transmission are automated. And recently, you've heard about the concerns about signal jammers. I'm not sure if that should really be taken seriously, because signal jammers have limited range. So for them to kill the signal of all networks within a certain location would cost a lot of money, and it's very easily resolved by going somewhere else and transmitting the results. Kasi yung Board of Election Inspectors, they can get the CF card, yun ito na yung results. They can go to another PCOS machine sakali sa munisipyo, stick it in there, and it will transmit. So I'm in favor of PCOS. I'm not against it. I'm sorry if I gave you the wrong impression. I like the fact that the results come out fast. I think the results are credible. We saw that in the last election, and I hope to see that in this election as well, moving forward. Anyway, so electronic signatures. As I mentioned, electronic signatures enjoy a limited recognition, but they only really affect these types of transactions. So it's the minority of transactions. In the larger scheme of things, when you click OK, and I'm sure all of us have, right? Everyone here has either a Yahoo or a Gmail or an Instagram account or whatever kind of email account you have. When you click OK to agree to the terms and conditions, that is sufficient for purposes of a valid contract that you can enforce. That document need not be signed. So it's very common for us to see that window, di ba? You click here to accept and then OK. How many of you have read that contract? I'm not raising I'm just showing you how to raise your hand. I haven't read it either. Even in a room full of lawyers of this size, siguro one person lang magre-raise ng hand. So nobody reads those contracts. But unfortunately, there is case law in the US that this type of contract is valid. What they call the click-through contracting. No? Click-through contract yan. It's valid, and courts have even enforced specific provisions. In particular, yung naging contentious provisions on arbitration. So if there's an arbitration requirement in the agreement, and I'm sure many of these contracts that we've clicked through that we haven't read contain a provision that says that in case there's a problem, we go to arbitration. So the courts in the US have said that kind of provision is actually enforceable. So what does this mean? This means that from your standpoint, if you're going to transact with the general public, you can write your contract any way you want it. You can make it slightly in your favor. And in many cases, it's necessary to be in your favor simply because software and hardware systems are not necessarily are not 100% error-free. And therefore, in cases where there's error, unless it's through really gross negligence, dapat walang liability yung government. So you can write contracts any way you want, and then you can have people agree to it, and that will be deemed enforceable under the law. Okay, so we go to the criminal provisions in the E-Commerce Act. And this is the provision on hacking. As I mentioned earlier, this has been, since the year 2000, our cybercrime law. We replaced it in 2012 with the Cybercrime Prevention Act. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court issued a temporary restraining order. I shouldn't say unfortunately, because I was one of the people who asked the Supreme Court to issue a temporary restraining order. We are petitioner number 3. We think some provisions were really bad in the in the Cybercrime Prevention Act. Anyway, when this was enacted in the year 2000, somebody did a global survey of cybercrime laws in the world, the Philippines was one of only 2 places in the world where we had what they call a comprehensive cybercrime law. And that was this singular provision, this in Section 33A and Section 33B. So what is hacking? So I break down hacking because it's a very long provision. I think that's the way legislators lawyers become legislators, and they have a tendency to write laws in language that only lawyers can understand. And perhaps that's something that needs to change. Parang you need to get a lawyer to understand very long sentences, copious use of semicolons and colons para pahaba yung sentence. Anyway, there are 4 particular acts under hacking. First is unauthorized access. So if you don't give authority to access a particular system, email box, computer. Remember, a computer is even your handheld phone to be considered a computer. In a very real sense, even just your email account, if it's compromised, that's considered hacking. Second, and this is the one that got us on the book, is interference with the operation of a computer system is considered the crime punishable under the E-Commerce Act. And we were one of only 2 countries in the world that penalized it. This covers what's known as a distributed denial of service attack. If you recall, after the Cybercrime Prevention Act was enacted, and there was a lot of protests, and if you wanted to look at the Cybercrime Prevention Act, the number 1 source was the Office of the President. I think the address was ops.gov.ph, something like that. And if you tried to go there on a particular day, you can't go. The site is down. So what happened on that day was what's known as a distributed denial of service attack. What happens is hackers infect slave computers. So let's say I am ops.gov.ph, and we are all computers on the internet, and you are the slave computer. So you've been infected by a virus that on a particular time and date, you will then send me requests, right? As if you're all visiting my site. And what the net effect is that I cannot serve all those requests. And you are all just slave computers. You're not real users, such that real users that want to access this site, they can't access it anymore. So there's a denial of service. Distributed because the attack comes from distributed across the internet. There is, to my knowledge, no way to stop this kind of attack from happening. The best that they can do is try to manage the attack while it's happening, but there's no way to stop somebody from launching this type of attack. And in fact, one of the core technologies on the internet, the domain name system, was subjected to this type of attack in the last decade, and it results in the slowdown of the way the way the internet works. So it's a major issue, and they can't stop it. And it's one of those things where the computers that are compromised are those with the lowest levels of security. And so parang the strength or the security of the entire internet is only as strong as the computers with the weakest form of security. It's, I guess, the consequence of an interconnected system. Okay. The third type of hacking is any access, whether authorized or unauthorized, if your intention is to corrupt, alter, steal, or destroy. So this is common for a lot of ex-employees in the US. We've seen this, where they are no longer, they've been laid off, or they're angry with their former employer, but somehow they still have access to the system. They go in and then they do this. So this is more of internal risks covered by this. Lastly is the introduction of viruses. And I guess this received a lot of media play because of the I Love You virus. And it is believed that the provision on introduction of viruses was inspired by the I Love You virus. And that is not true. The provision on the introduction of viruses was already there when the I Love You virus incident happened. It had been inserted the year before. So actually, so possession of a virus is not punishable. It is when you release that virus into the wild that it becomes punishable. Now, one thing about this particular provision is that it's only punishable if you actually succeed, right? Attempted hacking is not punishable in the law, right? So, in the case of my daughter, she always tries to unlock my phone. Ni-guess niya yung pattern. Sabi ko sa kanya, pasalamat ka naka-TRO ang Cybercrime Prevention Act. Kasi kung right now, it's not punishable. But if the Cybercrime Prevention Act were in place, that is attempted hacking what you're doing. So, that's a game that we play. But that's one of the things that's the flaw in this law, right? This law that we have, it's 13 years old, it doesn't cover a lot of things that should be covered. And therefore, while I've tried to stop the Cybercrime Prevention Act, I'm really interested in only certain provisions that need to be taken out. As a general rule, it's a good statute. It's something that we need to sort of update our laws, our cybercrime laws. Jurisdiction issues, it's a major problem. The Cybercrime Prevention Act addresses this problem to a certain extent, expands the ability of a Philippine court to take cognizance, and prosecute persons, even though the acts are committed abroad. So this is common. You have a Philippine server attacked by somebody in the United States, but his attack comes through a server that's located in Europe. So the American hacker takes over a server in Europe. Through that server, he will launch the attack on a Philippine website, for example. And therefore, the big question is: should it be prosecuted here? Should it be prosecuted in the U.S.? Should it be prosecuted in Europe? As a general rule, criminal law tells us that the jurisdiction of the court happens where the criminal performs his acts, kung saan siya where he committed his acts, his felonious acts. But in the case of cybercrime, those are in different places. One of the things that the Cybercrime Prevention Act included in its provisions is what's known as the effects doctrine. So let's say that this is a border, and I am in Nevada, and that's California. So I'm in Nevada, and I shoot that guy right on the screen, and so the act is committed in California, but the effects of the act are felt in Nevada. Now, under the effects doctrine in the U.S., because criminal law is state law in the U.S., it's not federal law, I can be prosecuted in Nevada because although I committed all my acts in California, the effects are felt in that jurisdiction. So we have that in the Cybercrime Prevention Act, that even if the perpetrator committed it overseas, if the effects are felt in the Philippines, a Philippine court can take jurisdiction over that particular crime. Okay, so we talked about this. So what's covered? Viruses, web defacements, intrusions, virtual rape. Yeah, there was that very, this was oh my gosh, late 90s, mid to late 90s. There was a community, and this was back in the day, this is just text. All you see, remember DOS? Yung gumagalang, puro text lang lumalabas. So it was a virtual parang playground where people interact. So what happens is, you have entered a room. Lalabas ganun. Johnny is in the room. Ganun. Then you can do certain things. You have certain powers. So it's really a role-playing game that I guess nerds do when they have the time. And what happened in this particular space was one player was able to take control of another player's character, and then they basically committed rape on that character. So it was a situation where if you were that character, all of a sudden you're using your keyboard and you cannot control what's happening. Meanwhile, you're seeing what is being done to your character. And the big question was, does that entitle the victim to the same relief as a rape victim? Even though it was entirely virtual. Entirely virtual. There's no physical harm. We've seen similar situations in, I don't know if you're aware of games like Ragnarok, yung mga massively multiplayer online games, people spend a lot of time on their character, right? Now, there were reports that in certain instances, a player would log on and his character was gone, deleted from the system. So it's as if that character had been murdered on the system, but because he had spent all that time, the question is should that be considered a crime, and should the punishment be we may laugh, but if that were an avatar that we spent a lot of time on, I know that there's although nagsara na yung virtual world na yun eh. I'm trying to remember what it's called. There was a virtual world before where you can even fly. You can build things. Some person built a replica of Amsterdam, and he sold it. So there was that virtual world before, and I remember there was a case that came out where a wife, she was getting a divorce from her ex-husband. She got a protective order, sabi niya, kasi sinustalk daw siya nung characters nung husband niya. So she has characters, and then her husband has characters, and pag lumilingon siya, nakikita niya yung character nung husband niya, sinustalk siya. So she was able to get an order. The judge actually issued an order requiring the husband to stay a certain distance, not just him, but all his other avatars, to stay a certain distance away from from the wife. Parang virtual stalking, and required the operator of the site to make sure that they're aware of all the yung mga credit card links to his identity, to make sure that the character does not go closer than a certain distance. Meron na rin tayong di ba, violence against women law, which also contains a provision on a temporary protective order. I wonder if at some point in the future that kind of parang don't stalk me on Facebook, a temporary protective order that requires Facebook to defriend a male from a female. So anyway, these things happen, and part of the policy question is, how should we deal with these situations? I mean, as people begin to have very significant investments in a parallel existence, right? That we invest time and money and energy, and if you are harmed in that space, should you be entitled to the same remedies as in the real world? The Cybercrime Prevention Act doesn't even begin to address that issue, but it's one of the things that we'll need to figure out. Online piracy. Dapat pala mali ako dito. I'm just curious, how many of you have done LimeWire or BitTorrents? Nag-BitTorrenting kayo or ano? No, walang amin. Ako nag-torrent ako to check for the speed, purely for research purposes. Kasi mabilis yung connection namin sa College of Law. Araw-araw ko nga chine-check eh. Mabilis. Biro mo 1 hour ko lang na-download yun. Ang bilis talaga dito. It's actually a crime. Kaya mali ako. I should have asked it before I showed you the screen. It's a crime to do that. We're one of the few countries that actually prohibit peer-to-peer computing if it involves the downloading of copyrighted materials. So it's a crime. No one has ever been punished under this law, under the provision on online piracy. It's there. It's lying in wait for a victim. So this is a major issue, major issue in the online space, which is intellectual property. In particular, copyright. There is a conflict between how we deal with intellectual property goods in the real world and what the law says. Okay, so if I tell you a good joke, right? If I tell you a good joke today, this afternoon you're going to you might repeat it to somebody else, right? So the tendency for people is when they hear something that's good or something comes to their knowledge that's nice, the tendency is to share it with others, di ba? Parang spread the good word. These are the perfect examples are memes that we see on Facebook, right? You see something, click, share. So it's a natural human reaction when you see something that you like. Unfortunately, under intellectual property laws, doing that may violate the rights of the intellectual property owner. So if you hear a nice song and you want to share it with somebody else, nung araw ang ginagawa natin, gumagawa tayo ng mixtape, di ba? Two sides. And then you do that, hindi na wala nang, meron naman siguro wala nang nakakatanda, mga bata pa kayo. Nung panahon namin, ganon, kuha ka ng plaka, tape mo sa tape, tapos ipamimigay mo. Now, so that, even under the law back then, that actually constitutes copyright infringement. Because you made a copy of the song. You made a full copy of the song and you put it, even though what you're doing is really just sharing the music. And so that, what's happening now, so let me step back. So before, you could do that. You could make a book, right? In fact, sa UP, magaling tayo. Sa UP Shopping Center, I should say, magaling sila dyan. Tawag book-alike, di ba? Galing nga, when I saw recently, pati hardbound books, I think indistinguishable from the real thing. Kasi colored na rin yung colored Xerox na glossy paper, yung sticker paper pa. Akala mo talaga, it's the book. But basically, it's a photocopy of a book. Now, so we've been doing this. All of these are actually in violation of copyright law. But in the real world, you can only do that in a very limited sense. If I were to make copies, mixtapes, for example, I can only make so much kasi it's a hassle to keep recording. So you really only do that for somebody special, right? When you make a book, let's say you wanted to pirate a book. Sakali, ano ba yung Harry Potter. So I'll make 100 copies for my friends, right? Kung magpo-photocopy ng 100 books, una hassle. But let's say nagawa mo, you have the 100 copies there with you, right? So you have 100 copies there. How do you distribute that to your 100 friends? Mahirap. It's hard. Real world piracy is difficult because it's difficult to distribute the goods. It's hard to store, hard to make copies. Now you go to the virtual world and all of those problems, they disappear. It's no longer a problem to share to 100 people. In fact, on the day one of the Harry Potter books was released in print, on that day, back in the day na buhay pa yung mailing list namin, somebody on our mailing list posted a Microsoft Word version of the same book on the day that the book was released commercially. Sabi ko nga sa kanya, pirata ka. But think about it. In one click of a button, that person distributed that book to 200 people immediately, right? Any of those 200 could have shared it immediately. And unlike, di ko alam kung natatandaan yung panahon ng Betamax, di ba, pag first generation, maganda. Pag copy from copy, pumapangit. Tapos pag third generation, wala na yan. Wala na, puro there's this fuzz that comes on the screen. Di ba? Because there's data loss as the copy is made from a copy. In digital technology, the copy is indistinguishable from the original. So these are perfect copies. So not only are you making perfect copies, it's easier to distribute. It costs you nothing to distribute. And so what's happening is the law now is really coming head to head with the way people are used to dealing with intellectual property goods. Tayo, ang tendency natin, share. You want to borrow my book? Borrow my book. You want to photocopy? Photocopy. But now we're doing it in a massive scale. And so ang pushback is that the countries that make these intellectual property goods are starting to, they want stronger intellectual property regimes. Okay, so these are most notable of which is the United States. So in the U.S., growth area, intellectual property is a growth area in their economy. So manufacturing, they don't do manufacturing anymore. They go to China for that. Diba? Even the iPhone is made in China. And I understand there was a White House dinner at which Steve Jobs was present. And Obama was asking, can we start making iPhones in the U.S.? Because the manufacturing capability is in the U.S. And I think in terms of cost, it's only slightly different, slightly higher lang, 10%, because of the shipping aspect. Parang 10% more expensive if they were to manufacture the iPhones in the US. And Steve Jobs said, sabi niya, those jobs are never coming back. And the reason why China is a better destination is not necessarily because of the cost, but because all of those companies there are all bunched up together. The manufacturing capability, yung synergies of all that manufacturing capability in one location is advantageous to Apple. So there's this story about when they were prototyping the first iPhone, and Steve Jobs had it in his pocket, and he would take it out, and there were scratches on the screen. I said, and that's because yung first version that they had, they used a plastic screen. He said, this won't work. It can't use plastic because it'll get scratched and then sira na yung, the experience would be different. And so he said, we need to use glass. Right? We need to use glass. Okay, so, but they were already about to go into production in China. So they needed glass. So he tells his team, look for a supplier for me. Within parang 24 hours, they got 4 quotes or parang 5 quotes from 5 different Chinese companies. We can deliver on this date. Ito yung cost, ito yung specs. Done. And sabi niya, you can't, that kind of synergy nearby, meaning where they were going to manufacture in Shenzhen, that kind of synergy is not available in the US. And in fact, what happened was they quick ordered the glass. It arrived in Foxconn at 2 in the morning. And they woke, yung sa Foxconn kasi they have these dormitories for all their workers. So they live on the spots. They woke them up at 2 in the morning. And by 4 a.m. in the morning, the production line was full blast. Sabi ni Jobs, you can never have that in the US. I mean, sleep is di ba? Very important to American workers. So what he's saying is that kind of environment is lost in the US. So manufacturing is something that the US doesn't do well anymore. What are they good at? They're good at intellectual property. So you look at the iPad, that's pure intellectual property. The manufacturing is done completely in the US. In fact, somebody broke down like where does the money go? You pay $300, well back then, $300 for an iPod. Where does the money go? So I looked down the list. Interestingly enough, some of it goes to the Philippines. Well back then, for the hard drives, may hard drive yan na maliit eh. Apparently the hard drives are made by Fujitsu, I think, and they're manufactured in the Philippines. So some of the money goes to the Philippines. A lot of the money goes to China. But the number one recipient of the profit is the United States. It's Apple computers, right? They're the ones who designed it. They're the ones who get a lion's share of the profits arising from that. Even a device like this, made in China, made outside. And it's because of the patents, it's because of the copyright design, it's because of the ingenuity that goes into making these types of devices. And that's true not only for devices, but that's true also for things like movies, for example. I think with the exception of India, the US movies dominate every market in the world. With the exception of India. Yung India talaga, hindi sila maka-break into the market. Masyadong malakas yung Bollywood. When you think of music as well, in the Philippines, dominated by US music. So what I'm saying is that the intellectual property industry, even software, internet, all of these are intellectual property related businesses that earn revenue because of license fees from the use of the technologies. And therefore, that is key to the US, to the development of the US economy. So much so that the US actually, the US government under the Department of Justice established a unit on intellectual property. And they consider intellectual property as a policy, they consider it in the same level as terrorism. So for them, parang intellectual property infringement is equivalent to real-world terrorism. It impacts greatly in their. It's very important to them, and we are recipients of that policy. So the Philippines, because of our desire to have free trade with the US imposes intellectual property regimes that are strict in the Philippines. So we're in that conversation as well, and this is one aspect of that, online piracy. If there was a recent amendments to the intellectual property code, again another indication. One provision there that I think is questionable is the Intellectual Property Office can now enter any establishment. So for example, a school. They can enter a school without a warrant. Simply upon a report that intellectual property infringement is occurring in that location. So walang warrant, they go in on the basis of a report, and when they see piracy, then they go to the court and ask a warrant to seize the items. So it's gotten to that point where intellectual property enforcement has now been pushed. Part of enforcement is not just being done by the IP owners, but it's being done directly by the government. Okay. So I'll skip these slides on. Okay. So we go to libel, which is siguro this is more of a side trip than anything else. In the area of cybercrime, I didn't think libel was so important. In the Cybercrime Prevention Act, libel was the pivotal issue. It was the Soto issue, so to speak. No? Soto was the one who put in that provision. Very good senator. Sabi ko nga, the Cybercrime Prevention Act case was parang an invention of the One Ball University. Because it all converged on Senator Soto. First, he plagiarized, right? He plagiarized a blogger. And then ano niya, he threatened people. He said, blogger lang yan. Una minaliit niya, di ba? Blogger lang yan. Wala namang ano dyan. And then second, sabi niya, kayong mga, kasi he got bullied online, right? He got criticized online. And then ang threat niya was, wait for the Cybercrime Prevention Act to come out. Parang kakasuhan ko kayo. And then the law came out. There was a provision on libel, increasing the penalties for online libel. And it turns out he was the one who put it in. So everything converged around Senator Soto. And I wondered why, and in fact, the provision on libel didn't even contain a separate penalty provision. It just relied on in the general provision of the Cybercrime Prevention Act. In other words, talagang insertion siya. But that's the one that really got a lot of people concerned. And I wondered. So I asked people at the DOJ, PNP, NBI. And what they told me, I was quite surprised, that the number one case that they file, in terms of volume of cases, are libel cases. Parang 75% of the cases that the PNP, NBI, and the DOJ handle are libel cases. And the format is more or less the same. Siniraan ako sa Facebook. Yun na yun. That's a day in, day out libel all the time. And that's why I think, in that sense, it's important as a policy issue. But there are arguments in favor of decriminalizing libel. Perhaps because it's so pervasive. It's not really, you can't really, it's not something that you should go to jail for. But I think the important issue about libel is that, is the exception. Is the exception in favor of the general public if the person who is the subject matter of the statement is a public official, right? It's a public official or a famous person. And so if it's a public official, because it's important for a well-functioning democracy to have a clear discussion about issues, particularly of the performance of public officials, libel law can be a hindrance to that. So we've seen that in the recent past. In particular, the former first gentleman filed a lot of libel cases, trying to not necessarily to sue for libel. The intention is to use libel law in order to stop public criticism, right? And public criticism is necessary in a well-functioning democracy. It's necessary for accountability of public officials. We've also seen that this technique used by the former GSIS chair, where he filed a lot of libel cases to forestall any criticism arising from the shortcomings of the GSIS at that time. And so it's important, in that sense, libel is important, that it is being misused. In fact, yung cyber-perling case, I think it would have been the perfect one. Here's an online activist who merely described what a mayor did during a public protest that was happening in his town. He merely described what he did. And on that basis, he filed a libel case. Now, ordinarily, that case should have been dismissed. Unfortunately, some prosecutors looked the other way, and instead of, or maybe they figure out that's a defense, no? If you want to invoke the defense that this person is a public official, prove it in court. So in good faith, they say, oh, sige, let the courts figure that out. But in the meantime, the person is charged in court. And the net effect is that the person who is charged will be less likely to continue the path of criticism. So in that sense, I think libel should be decriminalized, if only to improve or give voice to people wanting to make their views known with respect to matters of public concern. And, okay, moving on to our last topic, which is a topic that, well, it's worrisome. I don't know if you're familiar with the data privacy law. So this was I call this the twin or the older brother of the Cybercrime Prevention Act, they were enacted more or less at the same time, maybe within a span of 2 or 3 weeks from each other. But this law was not, nobody paid any attention to this law. This is the neglected older brother, or the neglected twin of the Cybercrime Prevention Act. But it is also a cybercrime. It contains penal provisions for violations of data privacy. So what is data privacy or informational privacy? Informational privacy involves personal information. So here's my graphic for the way that law works. No? So what is regulated is personal information, and not just private sector, but even the government. The way the government processes personal information is regulated by the law. Okay, basically, and the entity that is regulated is called a personal information controller. There is a 1-year transitory provision, the 1 year for compliance for the data privacy law. In other words, there are many things that you need to implement, but you have 1 year from the IRR to comply. The larger the organization, I think the more difficult it is to comply with this 1-year deadline, because privacy now is not just an issue for managers. It will be an issue for everyone in the organization, not just people on the top, but people at the front line. Because the issue here is how you deal with personal information. So what is personal information? So personal information relates to any information which can be linked to an identity. There you go. Okay. So for example, in your telephone right now, there are phone numbers that is linked to somebody's name. That is personal information. Okay. The person's address is personal information. So long as any piece of information that is linked to an identity is considered personal information. And then there's sensitive personal information, which are entitled to higher levels of protection. This includes information about somebody's race, ethnic origin, marital status. So kung tanungin nyo if I'm married, I'll say that's sensitive personal information. The reason for this is that, the reason why it's considered sensitive, yung background yan, is that this information, these types of information that we're seeing here, race, ethnic origin, these have been used historically in order to discriminate against certain people. In the US, they started interviewing people for admissions to universities. I read an article about Harvard where they started interviewing people in, I think, 1800s. The reason was, believe it or not, was to prevent Jews from entering Harvard. Kasi, so anti-Semitic sila. So if your name is Wasserstein or Spielberg, di ba sa may Berg or may Steen sa dulo, you're Jewish, they don't admit you. They don't admit you. So what some people did, in order to sidestep that, they would adopt their Christian mother's name, so naktago. Right? Anyway, form lang natatanggap. So one way to stop these people from going in was to call them in for an interview. On the premise that there is a physical, di ba, the Jews are known for big noses. So they come in really and they assess kung the person is a Jew. And so this is a situation where race information is used against that person. I mean, an extreme version of that is what we saw in the Second World War, right? Against the Jews. Same thing. So our data privacy law is inspired from the EU Data Protection Directive. And the underlying purpose here is to prevent discrimination. In other words, in a job interview, for example, if you're asked if you're married, if you're female, you ask if you're married or you plan to marry, right? That is considered sensitive personal information because whether or not you get hired might depend upon how you answer that question. Okay. So other pieces of sensitive personal information, health information. Okay. This is interesting. Information that is issued by government agencies peculiar to an individual. What this refers to are SSS numbers. In the case of UP, your good old student number or your faculty number. That is an unique identifier issued to you by the government. SSS, GSIS number, driver's license number. That is sensitive personal information. Meaning, it can never be disclosed except with the unambiguous consent of the data subject. Okay? So, what's processing? Now, what are the things, so I told you what personal information are. What are the things that you need more or less you need consent before you can process? Okay, what is processing? Collecting information, organizing it, storing, updating, selling. Okay, this is all considered under processing. And you can process information, you can collect information only in accordance with the data privacy principles. Basically, it's an issue of fairness and predictability. In other words, if you collect let's say I go to a grocery and I fill in yung raffle, right? I fill in the raffle stub. Now, if the information is not sensitive personal information, they can process it, meaning for purposes of determining who is the winner in the raffle. Right? Because yun yung expectation ko. My expectation is that when I fill out that form, the data will be used only for the raffle to determine who the winners are. And that after the raffle, all that data will be destroyed. It will not be stored by the owner. Neither will it be used to link to, say, my purchase, hindi ililink yung data na yun to my purchases in the grocery. Unless I give my consent. So that's one of the things that you'll need to figure out internally is to make sure that whatever data you collect, whatever data you store, you comply with the data privacy law. Okay? I'll skip this part on personal information controller. Basically, the one that's controlled is the personal information controller. And what happens is that there is a need to respect the rights of the data subject. So tayo yun, no? The data subject. We have a right to be informed when data is about to be collected from us, preferably before the data is collected from us. Okay? We have a right to access information. Now, from the standpoint of if you're the record keeper, if you have records with you, that means that your data subjects, the students, employees, etc., they have a right to access whatever information you have about them. They have a right to correct that information. Okay? This is an important right. In the case of the US, one of the things that's important for them is their credit score, yung credit rating nila. Their credit rating, if their credit information is wrong, it affects them in many different ways. The amount of interest they need to pay on their loans, etc. Right? Now, it turns out, there was a 60 Minutes show on this a few weeks ago. It turns out that 20%, a full 1/5 of all credit information in the US is false. I believe 20% of all financial information is false about individuals. In the US, kasi they don't have a data privacy law. So when you're the one that's affected, you call them to correct it. The call is routed to, among all places, Philippines also. No? So the data center person here answers the call. Hello, yes, there's a problem with my data. This data is wrong. They don't correct it. They'll make a note of it, but they won't correct it. They'll take the call. Because it's expensive for these companies to make corrections to their databases. So ang ginagawa nila sa US, they wait for you to sue, to correct. In the case of the Philippines, the personal information controller is required by law to correct that information if there is erroneous information. Now you may think, this can have impact on things like, if it's health information, on whether or not you'll get employed. Imagine if your health provider indicates that or there's some record out there that says that you are diabetic. So that affects things like the amount of premiums you pay on life insurance. Right? It might even affect the decision of an employer whether or not to employ you, because they figure, why should we employ someone who might be a health risk given the type of duties that they're going to give this person? If you don't have the right to correct that information, it impacts you in many different ways. Okay? There's also a right of the data subject. Once he has discovered that his rights have been breached, he can block access to his data. In other words, kukunin mo na yung data from them. This is true also for credit card information. So if you transact using your credit card, that data sometimes gets passed on. I don't know if you've received calls from credit card companies. Very resounding yes. Right, so that's a situation. Now, even though the data has been passed on to another entity, you can still ask that entity for your data, right? And then they are even required to tell you to whom that data has been passed on to. So in fact, all entities, including government agencies, will have to appoint a point of contact. Let's call that person a data privacy officer. That person's contact information will be made available publicly so that anybody wishing to get information will contact that person. That person is responsible to then respond, right, to the queries about the data that is being requested. And as I like to say, the downside of that job is that if a case is filed for violations of data privacy, especially criminal cases, because there are penal provisions in the law, if you're that person, kasama ka dun sa, more likely than not, you'll be included in the lawsuit. So what information is not included in the law? In other words, these types of data can be freely shared. First is anonymized information. So when you anonymize information, for example, grades, you say that the average grade of freshman UPOU BAMS students is 1.83. So that's anonymized already. You don't know to whom the data refers to. When it's been anonymized, it's no longer covered by the law. And then the law also includes certain types of information that are basically public information, right? So information about a government officer, information about government contractors. One of the major exceptions in the law, which I think is the reason why this law got very little play, was Congress very deftly excluded journalists from the data privacy law. In other words, a journalist, so long as he's collecting data, processing data for journalistic purposes, they don't have to comply with the data privacy law. They don't need to get the consent of that person. Research purpose is also excluded if you're collecting personal information for research purposes. One of the biggest exceptions is information necessary to carry out the functions of public authority. So this is, for me, it's a little confusing what is meant by information necessary to carry out public authority. So I thought about it in the context of UP. So it is necessary for UP, in order to carry out its function of handing out degrees, it's necessary to process grades, right? Because if you don't know the grades, you can't determine whether or not you're going to grant a degree. But what about other pieces of information, right? What about a person's address? So all of these other things which are not necessary, are they covered by the exclusion, or should they be protected as well? These things need to be resolved. No? A National Privacy Commission is formed under the law. It hasn't yet been organized. The president has not yet appointed anyone to those spots. There is an election ban going on. So at the earliest, siguro he'll come around to it around, let's say, July. Takes them another 6 months for the IRR, and then we'll get more clarity with respect to some of these provisions. Foreign residents are not entitled to data privacy in the Philippines. This is one of those things where the law, there was an intention, there was something they wanted to do, they did not achieve it. What they wanted to do was that if you're a foreign resident and you're already protected by data privacy law in your home country, then that is the level of protection that you're supposed to enjoy in the Philippines. That's what they wanted to do. Instead, what they said was that it's not covered by this law. And when they say it's not covered by this law, then it's not covered by any law. Yeah, because Philippine law doesn't necessarily adopt foreign statutes. So it's medyo incomplete yung pagkakagawa nila to. Ironically, the persons who put this in was the BPO industry. When the BPO industry, that's precisely what they want. They want privacy protection for foreigners so that they can tell foreigners when they get them for outsourcing, don't worry, your data is protected in the Philippines. The law was written in such a way that they're not protected. So I think they've moved to correct this error. Okay, let's skip the research exemptions. One of the talagang di na makita. So I call this like the cycle. What needs to be done in terms of data privacy? It's a bit of a problem, which I think a lot of agencies will need to deal with moving forward. But the bottom line is that the data privacy law contains criminal provisions. If you disclose, you need to be able to answer the question: are you allowed to disclose information when it relates to a particular identity? Because if you disclose that information, whether intentionally or even negligently disclose information, you commit a crime under the law. If you're supposed to secure personal information, meaning provide data security protection for data, if uh, if an, an incursion happens into that system, right, that personal information might have been compromised, you're supposed to report it to the National Privacy Commission. If you don't report it and you conceal it, it's a crime under the law. So because there are criminal provisions provided in the law, it's important to giving some thought about how you're going to protect or how you're going to comply with the data privacy law. So this is just a series of steps that I propose. First is a risk assessment to determine where your risks are. You really need to think about specific pieces of data and how you deal with that. So for example, HR data, like employment information, information from your customers, information from your partners, all of this information, you need to think about how you're collecting it, how you're storing it, how you're using it, how you're keeping it, is it secure, and how and when you will dispose of that information. So I know we covered a lot of ground, but we still have some time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Attorney Dicini. That was a very enlightening talk. I'm sure all of us learned a lot of new things about e-commerce. There's a lot more than meets the eye. And I'm sure there will be questions coming from the floor. I'd like you to hold on to your questions first. Before we proceed to the question and answer, I would just like to acknowledge the presence of some of our representatives from the UP system. They arrived while the talk was going on. I would like to acknowledge the presence of the Vice President for Planning and Development of the UP System, Dr. Elvira Samara. Okay. Is there anyone else, any other group who came in and who we were not able to recognize earlier? Okay, if none, I think we can proceed to the open forum. If there are questions, please come forward or use the microphones that have been provided on the floor. You may address your questions to Attorney Dicini.
Hi, I'm Crystal Bachera. I'm the team lead for EUP SPCMIS. Actually, that's one of our challenges with EUP is the signatures in papers. Since for the audit purposes, some papers need to be printed, and this is contradictory to what EUP stands for. My question is, are digital signatures allowed? One, is it digital or electronic?
It has to be digital. I mean, if you want it to be considered signed under Philippine law, then meaning the equivalent of a handwritten signature, then it has to be a digital signature. So magsiset up kayo ng public key infrastructure. Yes, yes. But you know, if it's within EUP, if it's a matter of getting approvals, for example, you don't those things don't necessarily have to be signed. They can just be confirmed by the person. By, for example, like what they do in one government agency, if somebody has to approve something, they've set up their system in such a way that the approval comes from a person with a BlackBerry or an Android phone. He opens an app and then he sees what he needs to approve. In order for him to access, he has to give his credentials, and he clicks OK, and then that's approved. So that's something that EUP can look at as a system, unless a signature is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, but when we're dealing with purchase requests, that is actually checked by COA. They actually need the signature. So instead of the signature that is signed, we'd like to know if we can just use the digital signatures. I think UP can distribute digital signatures to all the approvers.
Yeah, I wish I could answer your question. The only thing I can say is that we should approach the UP COA commissioners that we have there, and you know, these are questions that it helps UP, but it helps government in general as well. Because if we can resolve these issues, if COA can come up with a stand that this is the way we're going to audit online e-commerce transactions, then it makes it clearer, no, how we will proceed. I'm not sure if COA absolutely necessarily requires a signature, but in cases that they do, the default is to set up a public key infrastructure. more easily said than done. I'm not even sure if there are any commercial providers out there. There used to be. I'm not sure if there's
There
still
used to
out
be, yeah, but
Yeah.
not anymore.
there. Not yeah. So but I think there are low cost solutions. I think there are some open source solutions that might
Yes.
do the same work. The problem is in the
In recognition,
Well,
recognition
yes.
from COA.
right. More of the ano. That's right. So
Yeah.
complicated. It's a complicated issue. And actually, for EUP, I think the challenge also is there's data going in and out. So the way I understand EUP is that it sits in the middle, but it grabs data from different databases. That's the way I understand. Maybe I misunderstood.
No,
I doesn't.
No, yeah, EUP is a single. It's a like my boss said. It's a synchronized, energized thing.
Uh-huh.
It unites UP into having a single database for everything: HR, procurement, accounting, and budget.
Right. I guess what I was saying was that when you think about it from that standpoint, so if the system runs UP system runs EUP, say data collection might happen at, say personal, I'm talking about data privacy law. Data collection for students might happen at the Diliman level, but that data is then handed over by, that's the big question,
Yeah.
right? Is the data being handed over by Diliman to system? Because there are data privacy issues in relation to that transfer of data and the responsibilities with respect to handling of that data back and forth.
Actually, this seminar is one day late. Yesterday, we had a meeting. The EUP team leads had a meeting regarding data privacy. And we specifically listed all the things that we cannot divulge.
It's not just divulging; it's within your own.
Yeah,
networks.
within the organization.
No, there are fixes naman. I'm sure there are ways to solve that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Actually, ang favorite story ko sa data privacy law was I was in a church in the US years ago. They had the Health Information Portability Privacy Law, HIPAA. So there's no privacy law in the US, but for certain types of data, they have very strong laws. One of them is for health information. So I was in the pew, meetingin ako ng mga papel-papel doon. Tapos meron doon silang sheet kung gusto mo magpadasal. Padasal for health, ganyan. Tapos pagtingin ko sa likod, sabi, get the consent of the person. Kunin mo daw yung consent. Kasi otherwise, it violates the HIPAA law. So, that's true. Now, that's true for us. As I mentioned earlier, you saw that, di ba? Health information is sensitive personal information. You're not supposed to disclose that information to a third party without the consent of the data subject. So pag tinanggap nung parian na walang signed consent, and this is a Catholic church, that the one I saw that for me. So even they thought that you need consent. Magpapadasal ka na lang because that information is disclosed, right? You disclose the name, you disclose the ailment, you disclose the particular procedure that will be done to that person. So that's health information. It's protected. In the case of the Philippines also, very high levels of protection. So parang data privacy law is something that people like to think of as something that involves only commercial use of data. But given the way the law was written, it actually permeates through throughout our lives. And it's one of those things that, even as Facebook, when you think about it, when you disclose information on Facebook, you're basically dealing with personal information. So those things the National Privacy Commission will have to figure out. They will have, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But basically, we just have to be sensitive about personal information and how we're dealing with it on an organizational level. One of the bigger things one of the things that are going to come out in terms of regulations will be CCTV cameras. So they're everywhere. Right? Meron na nga sa ABS-CBN na, di ba, sa TV Patrol, meron silang portion sa dami ng CCTV. In other countries, they have in your car, may camera, may front-facing camera that records all the time. So you're gathering personal information as you're doing that. Diba? When we go to an ATM, kinukunan ka. When you enter an elevator, when you go to public places, a lot of these CCTV cameras are there. They're collecting personal information about you. Are they allowed to do that when they didn't get your consent? Right? In many instances, no one has ever come up to me and asked for a CCTV consent, to sign a CCTV consent form. So it's one of the things that we have to think about when we're thinking about privacy.
I'm Tina from UPOU. Idadami ko yung table namin. Kasi can we ask a very basic question, like, what is a digital signature and an electronic signature? What's their difference? At di ba nabanggit kanina na digital signature ang na-accept ng e-commerce sila. Pasensya na
Yes,
po,
yes.
I just don't know kung dahil non-IT lang kami or hindi lang kami nakikinig. Pero we would like to know the difference of the two. Thank you.
Digital signature is a specific type of technology. And, it uses encryption. Uses encryption technology. What happens is, so when you sign a document, what the technology does is it takes a snapshot of that document and then encrypts it with your, meron kang unique key, right? Now, which is only belongs to you. You send that package now to somebody, the signed document. When I receive the signed document, you have yung key that you use to encrypt it. There is another key that's publicly accessible that belongs to you. I can use it to decrypt. Pag na-decrypt ko siya, alam ko galing sa'yo. Kasi you have the other key, the key pair. The other pair is with you. And then I get the message, and then I can check whether or not the message has been changed. Diba? Because it took a snapshot of that document, and I can confirm. The only hole in that system is, are you who you say you are? Right? So that's filled out by a trusted third party known as a certification authority. So in your case, for example, a certification, someone who will say that you are who you are might be your employer. So in the case of PCOS, for example, it's DepEd who will say, this teacher is who they say is because we've challenged and this person has confirmed their identity. Now PKI or digital, this type of, what PKI stands for Public Key Infrastructure. This type of infrastructure hasn't really been adopted that widely. It was there was forced adoption in South Korea, and I met a professor. Although he didn't go into great detail, but he said that even in Korea, where everyone was required to have this type of parang digital ID, parang nag-fail pa rin. It still failed where they are. But maybe we shouldn't parang focus so much on the negative side of digital signatures, because the bottom line is that it's rare, no, that a signature is required. So you may not need to implement this type of security feature when deploying your own e-commerce solutions to deal with the general public. Kasi you can have other identifiers to do that, to perform that function. What is an electronic signature? I'm sorry. An electronic signature is actually anything. It can be an electronic signature. Any mark that you use. So let's say you adopt a certain logo, right? And you use that to identify yourself. That's an electronic signature. It's not the equivalent of a handwritten signature legally, but it's your signature. Some people, they put things at the end of their emails, diba? So that's their signature. Yung iba, nalagay nila ng quotes or they put whatever. That to the extent that you use that mark to identify yourself, that's a signature. Or meron na tinatawag na digitized signature. Iba yon. Yung scanan mo yung signature mo. So yan, ginagawa ko yan. Scan mo yung signature mo, scan, and then you paste it onto documents. Question, is that document signed? The answer is, it's not electronically signed, so it's not legally signed. It contains a facsimile. It's the equivalent of you getting a stamp and you stamp your signature. That's the extent. For purposes of Electronic Commerce Act, it's not considered signed.
Okay, one more question. Wala na po.
Okay.
Okay, if none, we would like to give now the token of appreciation to Attorney Dicini. So may I call on Vice Chancellor Saludades and PICPA Erie UPLB President Evelyn Inocencio and Attorney Bena Dicini to please give the token of appreciation to Attorney JJ Dicini. Thank you very much, Attorney Dicini.